Okay, in this exercise we're going to be using selection tools to extract shapes. We're going to be using Photopea, that is the free software, at least the open source software that you can find at photopea.com. I have included the link in the assignment. You can click on it and it'll take you to that website. If it's the first time that you go there, you'll see a big X on the right side. That just means you need to close it. Then you have the program. Photopea looks a lot like Photoshop. It works a lot like Photoshop. And the lesson that we'll do today, it's actually an older Photoshop lesson that I used to teach. So in order to start with the image, sorry you don't see the image here right now, you probably will see it once the video is running. It's right here. It's to start this assignment. Copy this link. You can right click on it and copy the link. This works fine, or at least it should work fine in a Chromebook. I will right click, clicking the right mouse button and telling it to copy the link address. This just makes it a little bit easier. Instead of downloading to your Chromebook and then going to look for it, it's already in the internet. So then in Photopea, you can click the file menu and tell it to open from URL. That's the link that we just copied. I will click, or rather right click, and say paste. You could have also pressed Control V as in Victor. And I'm going to click OK. It tells me that it's loading, and here's the image. It's just an old picture of some blocks. What we're going to be doing is using selection tools to pick out the blocks. There's 11 of them, by the way. And we're going to create new layers so that all the blocks, all the pieces are in different layers. So in the end, you'll have at least 11 layers. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's see. Let's start. The selection tools, there are multiple. There's not that many, but there's a few that you can use, and we will be using in this assignment. Depending on what kind of shape you want to look at, there's a rectangle select. By the way, notice this at the bottom right, that little arrow that points. That means that if you click and hold, you'll see that there's more tools than just one. There's a rectangle select, and you can also select as an ellipse. Rectangle will give you rectangles and squares. Ellipse will give you circles and ovals. I will then show you this other one. It's called the Lasso Tool. I'm going to click and hold the Lasso Select, at least in Photopea. It's called Lasso Tool in Photoshop. You can also use the Polygonal Lasso Select, and I think I will be using that at least a couple of times in this exercise. I'll skip the Magnetic Lasso Select for now. But definitely be able to look out for Lasso Select. That comes in handy in lots of occasions. For now, we will be using Polygonal Lasso. Let's see what else we got. We have an object selection and a quick selection. We might use that maybe once or twice here. Now, in previous lessons, or rather tutorials, I have not shown how to do all 11 pieces. I expect you to turn in all 11 pieces, by the way. If I stop at, say, 5 or 6, because I feel like if I showed you one triangle, maybe 2 triangles, that you can do the rest of them on your own, don't miss out on doing all the shapes, okay? What else can I tell you? Well, it's a flat image right now. It's a JPEG. Although since we opened it in Photopea, it's already sort of started to convert into a PSD, a Photoshop document, and that's what I want you to turn in the end, will be a Photoshop document. Great. Well, let's start then. I'm going to use the most basic tool here, the rectangular marquee tool is called in Photoshop. Here it's called the rectangle select. The M is a shortcut that you could have pressed M and it would have selected that tool. And a selection is just that. It's a selection. It's a place in the canvas, in the image that is selected or can be selected. What do I mean by that? I'm going to click and hold down the mouse button, and as I'm clicking the mouse button, I'm going to drag across this shape so that I can draw a rectangle. This is a tall rectangle, just like the shape I want to copy. If you don't like it because you thought, well, I could have started somewhere else, the selection, you noticed, is turned active. It shows us what we like to call the marching ants. It's just basically the marquee is kind of flipping around a little bit. If I press Control D or go to the select menu and tell it to deselect, right there, Control D, it will turn off the selection and we go back to square one. By the way, if you make a selection like I did just now with this rectangle, you can move the selection. That is, see how the cursor changes from a regular cross to one with arrows. The arrows means that I can click and drag. The selection is what moves. Everything else, I would need to do something to make move the selection from there. So the blue stayed behind. The selection, the marching ants, is what moved. I can move it back by the pressing Control Z or trying to get it back in the right place. I could have also come back and looked at my history and tell it to go back in time until I did the initial rectangle select, although if I recall correctly I didn't like that one, so I'll go forward to this rectangle select. So I have this one selection made. I'm going to have one of these, and then later I'm going to have another one like this, the one on the right, the red one. It looks a lot like it. It's going to be very similar, but it's its own selection. At the beginning I told you that when we open this is a JPEG, it's a flat image, so it's only got one layer. Look at the layer panel on the right. The only layer that exists is called background. The eye means that I can see it, and if I turn off the eye, the selection goes away, or at least I can't see it. The selection is still there, right there, and the image is still there. Everything that you do with these shapes needs to happen in new layers. So since I'm going to be doing a lot of copying and pasting, I could, just for kicks, just so that you know that this can happen, you can select a new layer button at the bottom right. You can also go, well, let me click it before I go anywhere. Click on new layer and notice how a new layer appears. It's transparent, and I know it's transparent because I can see the checkerboard there. If I turn off the background, I see all of the checkerboard everywhere. This is a transparent image. That means there's nothing there to look at. However, I know that there's a background layer that's full of pictures. So I know that layer 1 is what's actually active right now because it's darker than background. If I were to click on background, that becomes active. And it needs to stay active because this is what has all the image. And if I'm going to copy or cut or do anything with this image, I need to be in the background layer. And what I do want to do is copy. I want to make a copy of the tall rectangle there, and I can do that by going to Edit and telling it to copy. Note the shortcuts. Control C copies, Control V pastes, Control X cuts. These are universal shortcuts. They work in Photopea, they work in Photoshop, they work in Illustrator, they work in PageMaker, they work in your browser, they work in Word, they work everywhere. That's what I mean by universal. Everywhere in the known universe they work. So I'm going to copy. Control C I could have done, or just click here. Now, by copying it, this information, this part of the image has been copied onto memory, into the clipboard. The background remains the same. The layer 1 remains the same. I'm going to click on layer 1 so that it's selected. That means that this is now active, so anything that happens next will happen in this layer. What can happen now? I have copied the blue rectangle. I'm going to turn off the background so that you can see in action that if I go in Edit and paste what I just copied, the image will be placed onto layer 1. I can sort of see it. It's right there in the thumbnail, but it's definitely here in the square in my canvas area. I'm going to turn on the background so that you can see that everything is still there. It copied and pasted it right on top of where it used to be. If I were to turn off layer 1, which is the blue rectangle, I can still see the original image behind, and that's why I wanted to copy rather than cut it. If I were to cut it, and let me show you with the other shape, if I were to cut it, it would leave behind the nasty scar, basically. I'm going to select the rectangle on the right and tell it to cut. Edit and cut. That's Control X. And it just cuts it right out of the picture so much that I can see that it's transparent behind it. It's like I poked a hole through this image. I want to undo this. I can press Control Z as in zebra, or I can say Edit Undo, which also redoes. If you press Control Z twice, it will do it. It will cut it off and then bring it back. Or I can go back in history and say Rectangle Select and just keep the selection there and not worry about it. While everything was happening in this area, layer 1 stays the same. What's in layer 1? Remember, it's that blue rectangle. you're going to end up with 11 different layers. So I recommend, actually I insist, because it's part of the exercise, that you double click on the layer names on the side. Layer 1, I double clicked, is now active, and I'm going to call it blue rectangle. By calling it blue rectangle, I'll be able to figure out where it is really quick. And that comes in a little bit handier once I have more of these layers going. So I want to make another copy. I already selected this rectangle, so I might as well copy it, right? I'm going to click on the background to make sure that I'm there. That's where the picture is, so that I can copy and paste it again. Rather than doing a straight Control-C to copy or edit, copy, and paste, I'm going to use another command. I'm going to use the layer menu and tell it to create a new layer via copy. This is a similar action to what exists in Photoshop, that you tell it, hey, this selection that I have, make a new layer and then copy the selection. So I click on that, a new layer appears. It's called layer 1. That it will always be called layer 1, and unless you have a layer 1 already, then it will be called layer 2. Layer 1, I know I just copied, it's the red rectangle. I'll double click on layer 1, the name, and say, call this red rectangle, just by typing it in. I missed the red, there it is, red rectangle. And I'm going to turn off the background again, just so you can see I have a red rectangle on the right and I have a blue rectangle on the left. I'm going to turn on the background again, and I'm beginning to have a series of new layers created. Eventually, like I said, you'll end up with 11 layers, at least with 11 shapes, not including the background. So let's go on to the next tool and the next shape. I told you before that I'll show you how to do a couple of the triangles, and then you can do the rest of the triangles on your own. Don't miss out on doing all the shapes, okay? I'm going to click on the Lasso Tool. And Lasso Tool is what I expected back in the day when I was probably in high school or before that this is how graphic programs would work. Basically, you just draw, you make a selection, and there's my selection, and then I can just copy, paste, or paint, or whatever. Notice though, if I try to make a square, that doesn't look anything like it. If I wanted to select this triangle, I would be kind of wobbly. I'm not very good with the mouse when it comes to things like this. So in order, I click somewhere just to undo that selection. I could have also pressed Control-D. But I do have access to multitude of tools, as I said before. I'm going to click and hold down the lasso select, and I'm going to go to the Polygonal Lasso. A Polygonal Lasso, basically it's a lasso that draws polygons, and it's all in shapes and size, or sides I should say. What I mean is the simplest polygon, I mean you can't have a two-sided polygon because then it can't really exist, would be a three-sided polygon, and that's a triangle. Although I'm sure that there's tools out there that could say, hey, to get this triangle selected, I'm going to draw a triangle with this Polygonal Lasso. You saw me draw that wobbly shape. Polygonal Lasso basically says, pick a corner, and I'll pick this lower left corner of this yellow triangle, click on it, and I'm going to move my mouse without clicking anything to the top right corner of the square / triangle and click. By doing that, the selections begin to be drawn. I can barely see, but there is a series of moving or marching ants. I'm going to move my mouse down to the bottom right corner. Click here. I'm drawing this triangle. I'm going to take it back to the last corner in the lower left, sort of try to get close to where I started, the point of origin, and click again. And by doing that, I have clicked 1, 2, 3, 4 times to get 3 sides selected. And once again, this is just a selection. I can move it. Look at my triangle. So my selection is good. I'm going to press Control-Z to move it back. You don't have to move your selection. And then it's up to you. What do you want to do with the selection? You want to copy it? You want to create a new layer to copy it? It's up to you. Just don't mess up the background. Make sure that you're in the background if you're going to copy from here by clicking select, or rather layer, new layer via copy. So now I have another layer that's called layer 1. I'll double click on it, and I'm going to call this SM, that's for small, yellow triangle. I'll just say TRI. Okay. Do the same thing for the blue, or at least similar things for the blue. Select the corners, copy it however you want to copy it, and put it in a new layer and call it, I don't know, large, or rather small blue triangle. Speaking of large, let's do the large ones over here. I'm going to still use the same tool. I'm still in this Polygonal Lasso. And click on the corners, just like I did on the smaller triangle. Click once, twice, 3 times over here, and then find the point of origin at the top. And now I have this selected. I'm going to press in the background, because that's where the picture is. I want to press Control C on the keyboard. That copies it. And then I'm going to press Control V as in Victor to paste. A new layer appears called Layer 1. I'll double click on Layer 1. I'll call this LG, short for large, and large blue triangle. I'm going to turn off the background, and as you can see, I'm almost halfway there with this assignment. I'm going to turn on the background again. I could also use other tools. The one here, the little bean that I showed you earlier, the object selection. Let's do a quick selection. Quick selection or magic wand, either one of these will work kind of similarly. A quick selection basically will say, click somewhere where there is an image and then drag to keep on copying or selecting things that look like it. So if I click and drag across, well, I have to be in the background. Sorry about that. See how nothing happened as I tried to click and drag in the blue triangle, because only the blue triangle has something in it. Everything else is transparent. I'll click on the background. This one has an image. I'm still in the tool, the quick selection tool. I'm going to click and drag, and that's too much because it confuses all the characters, or rather all the colors from left to right. And although I'm sure that I could change this to work a little bit better, I'm not going to go into it this early in the class. I'm going to press Control D to deselect. I could have also gone to select and deselect in the menu. So let's use the other tool. Let's use click and hold, and I'm going to use the magic wand. The magic wand will be something that if you click on a pixel that's a color, it will try to pick every color that's similar next to it. So I click here, and I'll click again, and notice how it's trying to get the green from all these places. And so I'm holding the Shift key as I'm doing this, and every time that I click somewhere that it's green, it's actually adding more to the selection. Just don't go beyond the border, because otherwise if you do that, you'll get a selection you don't want, like that one. I press Control Z to undo, and it's not the best square, but like I said, for now we can refine this later with the tolerance and all of these other selections that we can add. But for now, this is going to be okay, kind of okay. If you want to do a better square, I'll press Control D so I can start again. Use the rectangular marquee. Although we used it to create rectangles, a square is nothing more than a rectangle. It's just got equal sides. So I click and drag from here to here. And notice how I didn't make it as big as I wanted. And that's fine, because the selection can be moved or it can be actually modified. I can do that by clicking on the select menu and tell it to transform the selection. By transforming the selection, it started as a square. I needed a larger square. I can click on the anchors on the side, on the top, on the right, on the left, etc. to make it the size that I need. It's not changing anything except the size of the selection. Once I'm happy with the size that I have, that I end up with, I can double click inside of the shape. Not too much. I'll press Control Z. I did it a bit too hard, I guess. I did it 3 times. But by double clicking, it actually accepted it. Another way to do it, let me see if I can go back and do this again to show you another way. I can click on Select, Transform Selection. It adds these anchors. I move it to be the size that I want. Be careful not to rotate, unless that's what you want. And I have my selection back to the shape or size that I want it. Once it's done to the right size, and it's ready to go, I'm going to find this little check mark up here. It just confirms it's the same as double clicking. So by confirming, I have now selected the square that I can then say, hey, let's make a new layer, in layer, new layer via copy. I'll double click on layer 1 and call this green square. Let me turn off the background. And there's my green square, my small yellow triangle, and all the other shapes that I've copied and pasted. I want to show you how to do one more, and then the rest please do on your own. Like I said, you're going to end up with, so far we have a yellow triangle, you're going to have another small blue triangle, you're going to have the large yellow triangle, and you're going to end up with these two, or rather four, because although we have the two squares, we also have two dots, two circles. And how do we deal with this? Let me show you how to do one, and the other one you can do on your own. I'll click on background. Once again, to make sure that this is what I want, I'm going to use the rectangular marquee. I'm going to make a selection on the green square, something like this. I'll do it again. I'm going to just click somewhere else so that it resets the selection. Okay, so I have this right now. It's selected in the background. I'm going to make a copy by saying layer, new layer via copy. I have a new layer there, and I'm going to call this one, because I'm going to take out the red dot, I want to end up with what's green around it. Let me turn off the background to show you what I mean as I'm doing it. I'm going to call this green donut, because it's a square with a hole inside of it. I could fit, I guess, green square donut, but I'm just going to call it green donut. It's not a donut yet because that circle's still there. So I'm going to make sure that the green donut layer is selected and it's active. And I want to do the same thing to the dot that I've done to all the images so far. To do that, I'm going to click and hold down the rectangle select tool and select the ellipse select. That way I can get going on a circle. So here's the thing about drawing circles in Photoshop. Although originally I thought that maybe I could start at this corner, well, it's not really a corner, but it's the top left side of the circle, and just click and drag down. Notice how small the selection is. Let me zoom in a little bit to show you what I mean. That's not the circle that I wanted. I want to get the whole circle, right? So I can either try to guess where to start, or I can just consider the square to be, or rather it's not a square, consider the circle to be a square. I can show you that by, you don't have to do this, this is just for demonstration. So I'm going to use the move tool, and I have my rulers on. If you don't see your rulers, you can press Control R, not Control T, Control R as in ruler, and that made them disappear. But if you don't see rulers, Control R will actually make them appear. You can also go to the View menu and tell it to show you the rulers. And these rulers, if you click and hold inside of the ruler, a line will come out. And just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you what I mean by thinking of this circle as a square. So at the very edge of the circle, I'm going to lay down these rules, and notice what encompasses the circle. It's a square, and the square begins at this top left. And I want you to think of that as a guide, so that when you have your rectangular, or rather your ellipsis select, and you click, rather than clicking here on the top left side of the circle, start to click and hold and drag at the top of that square, or at least imaginary square, and notice how much better we can do this by selecting the circle. It's not perfect, but as I showed you before, we can edit the circle by telling it to select menu and transform selection and move it to the shape that you want. So now I'm going to, before I move forward, let me get rid of the rules there, the square. I'm going to click on the Get tool. Like I said, you didn't need the rules, it was just for demonstration. But if you have drawn some rulers, you can always click on them and drag them right back where they came from. Notice how the selection is still active, which is good because now in the green donut, which is still not a donut, I'm going to use the layer menu and tell it to create a new layer via copy. But is that right? Is that what I want? Not really, because it made that little dot there. But since it copied, let me show you what's left. The whole thing is still there. So I have this dot and then I have the original image underneath. And this doesn't really help me. So rather than doing a layer via copy, let me go back in history to delete guide. That's the last thing I did before I did anything. Let's see what the options are. You have select and modify. I should say you have layer and new layer via copy. There's not a new layer via cut, but you can always just cut. So I can say edit, cut. That cuts the red. And then as I'm still in the green donut, because anything that I paste on top of Photoshop will create a new layer on top of whatever the active layer is. I want green donut to be the active layer so that when I say edit and paste, it creates a new layer. It's now called layer 1, and that's my red dot. So I'm going to rename that red dot. I'm going to press Ctrl-0 to sort of zoom out and see everything. I still have a few shapes to go, but I'm going to leave you to your own devices to do those. Make sure that you get the other triangle, that you get the other donut, that you get the other large triangle as well. And in the end, if you want to change the background, you can do so if you want by bringing in a new picture and putting it on top of that layer. Let me show you the reason why I'm calling all of these layers by name. If I wanted to go and select this red donut or red dot, well, it's right there. It's easy to find, right? But let's say that I had even more layers. How would I know, how to get to it if I don't have enough space to look at? Well, if you're in the move tool, or I think pretty much any tool, and you sort of hover around the area, I know that I don't have a blue triangle, but I think I did a yellow triangle at one time. I'm going to right click on top of it, and it shows me that I clicked on top of the small yellow triangle and the background. If I click anywhere else, or rather if I try to see what else I clicked, there's nothing there other than the yellow triangle in the background. If I click on this side, there's not a blue triangle, all there is the background. But if I click here, I can click on the small yellow triangle, and by doing so, it becomes the active layer on the right side over here. And then I can do things with this. Once you're done with all the shapes, make sure that you save and you turn in your file. Make sure that you go to File and Save as PSD, so it's a Photoshop document. That way I can see all of your layers. And it's already got a name, but I'm going to call this one Shapes. Doesn't matter really what you call it. If you want to be able to find it in your drive, then I recommend that you give it a name that you understand, something that makes sense to you. I'm going to click on Save. I'm saving it into my Google Drive so that if I were to turn this in, and as I've told you before, I can't turn stuff in, but I can show you that I can go to the exercise, click on 2.1 to see the exercise, and scroll down below and tell it to browse my computer. Look in my Google Drive, and I'm keeping my files in RC1402. There's the shapes that I just talked about. I'm going to click on Open, and now it's ready. Once I hit Submit to move it, it will be ready for you. When you try to do this, I can't turn something in. It'll give me an error. Make sure that you have all of the shapes cut and in different layers, that you have all the layers named, and that you turn this in before it's due.